Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anna, and I'm a project manager at Clean Energy States Alliance. The topic for today's webinar is an Equitable Solar Access pilot project in Minnesota benefiting manufactured home residents. Before we go any farther, let's go over some quick webinar logistics. You'll notice you have a webinar console, which should look like the picture that's shown on the right-hand side of the screen here. You can use the console to adjust your audio. Either you can listen from your computer speakers or you can call in via telephone, but all of our listeners today are in listen-only mode. Near the bottom of the console, you'll see there's a box where you can write and submit your questions to us. We'll hold a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar, aiming for 15 to 20 minutes there. So hoping to get lots of questions and have some great discussion at the end. Please remember to submit your questions as you think of them. Don't wait until the Q&A session to submit them, just so that we can get a running list going early. If you'd like to view the speaker's presentation in full screen, you have the option to do so. You just need to click on the orange arrow, which you'll see is circled on our sample webinar console. That will reduce the control panel, and you can make it larger again by clicking the orange arrow again. One final note, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send out an email afterwards with the recording of today's webinar, as well as the slides that the presenters are using. This information will also be posted on our website, cesa.org/webinars. And that URL is a good one to know because that is also where we share all of our upcoming webinar info. And we have a whole bunch of webinars coming up, several of which that I think you all will find interesting. We'll preview them at the end of today's webinar. So with that, I will pass it over to today's moderator, my colleague, Matt Olaf. He is a project manager at Clean Energy States Alliance. And we'll be moderating today's webinar. All yours, Matt.
Great, thanks so much, Anna. Thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. As Anna mentioned, my name is Matt Olaf. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a project manager at CESA. CESA is a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations working together to advance clean energy. Next slide, please. CESA works with state leaders, federal agencies, industry representatives, and other stakeholders to develop clean energy programs and inclusive renewable energy markets. CESA members, mostly which are state agencies, include many of the most innovative, successful, and influential public funders of clean energy initiatives in the country. And you can see our members' logos on your screen now. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is a product of CESA's Scaling Up Solar for Under-Resourced Communities project. This project is an initiative aimed to accelerate the development of solar projects that benefit low and moderate income, or LMI, households and communities. The project has 3 separate tracks or subsets to develop solar for LMI markets. Those subsets are LMI single-family homes, multifamily affordable housing, and today's focus, manufactured homes. This project is made possible through funding awarded from the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technologies Office. Next slide, please. Today we're joined by 3 panelists who will describe the project, which is the focus of this webinar, in depth and their roles in the project. Gabe Chan and Steve Coleman are with the Chan Lab at the University of Minnesota Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And Dan Josephson is the Energy Program Director at Mahube-Otwa Community Action Partnership. Before I hand it over to the panelists and start the presentation, as Anna mentioned earlier, if anybody has a question, please post that while the presenters are speaking, and we will answer those questions during the Q&A session after the presentation. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Steve.
Unmute myself. Thank you. I want to thank CESA for having this webinar here. I guess I'm on slide 4 now. Maybe I can't. There we go. Now I see where I am. Sorry about that. We can advance here. The Chan Lab is a lab at the University of Minnesota, and we do a lot of research into co-op and municipal and electric. And this project is with Detroit Lakes Public Utility and Mahube-Otwa, as you can see. Detroit Lakes is in far northwest Minnesota, very rural area, and this project is partnered with the Detroit Lakes Public Utility because they had an existing solar array, and one aspect of this is there is a capacity to be added on the inverters, and working along with CERTS, we were able to do that and start looking at this. Advance, please. This is a little more detail about Mahube-Otwa and what happens in the area. This is, 122 million awarded to energy assistance generally, with average awards around 927. And the number of families that have, or households that have received assistance here. And some demographics, over 60 and under, ages for that, and some details of heating fuel deliveries and to understand the types of customers receiving heating. And Dan may be able to explain a little bit more, but using the criteria to participate in this program of finding customers, he used all these demographics and moved along that way. This next slide discusses what happened just this year. Earlier this year, the array was augmented. This existing array was augmented with another 11.6 kilowatts of modules in February, and since then this has been tracked and is about 29% of the overall community solar array, and was the previous part of it was already subscribed to by customers in the Detroit Lakes Public Utility area. But by having this extra capacity and adding it on there, it's a very natural opportunity to test the application of kilowatt hour credits to help with the energy assistance. And my role has been collecting a lot of the data from the arrays and building models for predictive production of the array. What will it produce in years future, and what has been the actual production on this array existing in this site, to study the likelihood of energy production and get our annual energy outputs. And I think, Dan, if you want to explain a little more about Mahube-Otwa.
Sure, thanks, Steve. Like was mentioned before, I'm Dan Josephson. I am the Director of Energy Programs here at Mahube-Otwa Community Action Partnership. The name itself, Mahube-Otwa, comes from the first two letters of the 5 main counties that we serve here through Community Action. So it's Mahnomen, Hubbard, Becker, Otter Tail, and Wadena counties in northwest Minnesota. We have about 5,800 square miles that we traditionally work through, and we provide various arrays of programming for the territory that we serve. One of the major programs that we do is LIHEAP, or Energy Assistance, as it's known in the state of Minnesota and much of the country. We do weatherization, we've got Head Start, we've got senior programs, we've got all sorts of different programs associated with community action. We got our base out of the War on Poverty and the Johnson administration, and we've kind of been that poverty fighting network across the partners with over 1,000 other community action agencies across the country. Zooming in a little bit closer, we're really looking at Detroit Lakes and the Detroit Lakes Public Utilities territory, which is in Becker County, and part of what we do is energy assistance and And overall, in all of our counties, we have about 50 or 6,500 annual energy assistance households, and trying to make the most impact. And that's what we're trying to do here with the community solar program. And really even deeper into that, we want to really focus on manufactured homes, because you see the energy burden on those families that are living in manufactured homes, and just you see those people more so in poverty, and we want to make a big impact on their lives and try to get them up and out of poverty. So a little bit deeper, we started looking at how can we make this impactful, because traditionally a community solar garden, you can buy a panel and you get a bill credit of anywhere between 59 cents and $4, depending what time of year it is and what time of the year it is. The way that we kind of selected things is we wanted to find all electric homes. We wanted to find people that we could make an impact on. So we kind of limited it to homeowners, so we could have kind of a stable population to do this pilot program with. We want to have it not so there, we've got some customers that are 60,000 kWh a year, which is an insane amount of electricity. But we kind of looked at that and we kind of dialed that back to, does that 30,000 kWh a year make sense? And that's where we kind of landed, where we have homeowners, we've got under 30,000 and above 10,000 kWh a year, and we really want to focus in on that manufactured home population. We do have quite a bit of natural gas in this area, especially in the public utility territory that we're doing this in. So we do have, initially here in this pilot program, we've identified 13 homes, and we've done some intensive outreach to try to get some more data from them, and then also get their buy-in into this program. Let's go on to that next slide there. Kind of covering a little bit of that here. So, like I said before, manufactured homes aren't necessarily energy efficient. They tend to age, and as they age, they definitely need a little bit of extra work. So, in addition to the solar project, a few of the homes have already received weatherization through the Department of Energy weatherization programs that we offer here. So we're trying to make it energy efficient, and then also allow for getting a solar participation. I think Gabe will talk a little bit more into how that modeling works on the back end, and how that definitely will help out people. I think we can probably move on to the next slide. So I can speak a little bit to the Detroit Lakes Public Utility participation, and then I'll hand it off to Gabe. One of my other roles in another hat that I wear is I am on the City Council for the City of Detroit Lakes. The public utility is a separate entity, but is under an agreement with the City Council and so forth. So through this project, we're adding on an 11 kW array onto the existing community solar garden. I am a member of the community solar garden that was installed years ago. But this is another component to this, and how does that work? What are the benefits to the city or the public utility versus what is the benefit for the customers or the people on energy assistance, and how do you balance that out? Because there's the bill paying piece. One of the things that I'm a proponent of is you can kind of get that local generation of electricity. You get the potential of lower that demand charge, so you're not peaking at the wrong times and causing some of that. So there's stability on the utility side, but then there's also benefit on the the low income side. Another big part of this project is trying to figure out how do we get the credits to the individuals who need them without impacting the energy assistance grant throughout the year. Our typical grants, they were at $900, and they've been kind of fluctuating a little bit down. They're kind of settled back into where they were before COVID. We saw a big influx of dollars for energy assistance over the last 2 years, and now we're settling back into what our old normal used to be. And there's a little bit of a pain point just because, going from a benefit of $1,600, $1,800, now back down to that $800, $600, $500 range does have an impact on people's lives. And being able to scale this project up is going to be something that's important. And I will now hand it over to Gabe to kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of the project. And thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And hi, everyone. Again, my name is Gabe Chan. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota in the School of Public Affairs, and was very excited to partner with Dan at Mahube-Otwa, also Vernell Roberts, the general manager at Detroit Lakes Public Utilities, who had a conflict today, but sends his regards, as well as our Clean Energy Resource Teams, which is a partnership based out of University of Minnesota Extension and our state Department of Commerce, the State Energy Office. So I want to talk a little bit about the model that we envisioned in this project and a little bit how it works, and then what we did to analyze the feasibility. And then I'll end with some questions, open questions from our team as we think about next steps. So first, in this project, it begins, as all solar projects, with a solar array that has to get paid for. In this case is a pilot project that was paid for with grant money that was facilitated by the Clean Energy Resource Teams I mentioned earlier. And this array, as Dan mentioned, was an add-on to an existing community solar array at Detroit Lakes Public Utilities. So in our work, we're looking at this solar array and its performance, its model performance with kind of standard industry tools, the NREL SAM model. But we also really tried to tailor our analysis to the unique market segment we're looking at, which applies to a lot of municipal and cooperative utilities, which is that they are in a wholesale power contract that has an energy and a demand charge. And the interactions of solar with these kinds of wholesale power contracts is pretty unique. For a lot of munis and co-ops, they're billed on an energy charge and a demand charge, where that demand charge can sometimes represent around 50%, plus or minus 20% of their wholesale power costs. And so those demand charges, which are often based off of the highest 30 minutes or 60-minute period of consumption within a month, or sometimes even a year, sometimes defined one utility at a time, sometimes defined as a group of utilities, can create really variable value for solar projects. Because if that solar project happens to be generating during the period of the billing demand peak, there can be a lot of value. But if a cloud passes over on the exact hour during which that utility is going to have 50% of its power costs for that month, it can have very low value. And so we took a lot of care to try to analyze exactly how much value this solar array would create for Detroit Lakes, using some of their historic data on their billing peak timing and simulations of solar production at a very fine temporal resolution. What we found is that actually, yes, we confirmed that for a lot of munis and co-ops, the value of solar is going to bounce around quite a bit. And so there's going to be some variability. And we have to factor that in trying to figure out how to create this really energy assistance supplement that can help households and not pass through that variability of solar value to the households. It would be a bad outcome, we think, that if the changing value of solar to the utility was also making people's energy assistance go up and down. And so we had to think a lot about how to create some buffers within this program so that there could be consistent benefits to households, even as that benefit to the utility is going up and down. So I'll talk a little bit about how we accomplished that with this pilot. So anyway, first two pieces, understand the initial investment, in this case a grant, but we've modeled it as, what it would look like to scale up. And then number two, what's the value to the utility in terms of avoided wholesale purchases? But this is really any old solar project. So here's where some of the innovation comes in, is this solar project is creating essentially monthly kilowatt hour deposits in a kilowatt hour bank. And so what we have going on here is, as this solar project is generating, rather than immediately monetizing that generation, we have it being, those kilowatt hours being banked by the utility. Those kilowatt hours are going to then accumulate over the course of a year, and those will continue to accumulate until they're drawn down. And the utility will receive back transfers from energy assistance just in those heating months. And so we have this kind of accumulation of kilowatt hours over the entire year as solar is generating, and then the transfers of energy assistance in the heating season. From the household perspective then, those EAP benefits, those kilowatt hours are going to get monetized just during the heating months. And so they're accumulating over the course of the entire year, and then they get drawn down when energy assistance otherwise would have been provided. And so that kind of 3B and 4, the EAP transfer back to the utility and the monetization of the kilowatt hours by subtracting them from the bill is happening just in the heating season. And then the household is paying their monthly bill, whatever's left at the end of that. And so I think a couple of the innovations here to point out are, one, we're doing all of these calculations with a kilowatt hour bill credit, and we're tracking that kilowatt hour accumulation and drawdown in the sort of accounting process between the utility and the cap. And in doing it this way, there are a couple of additional benefits. It creates a kind of a virtual net metering de facto, but it also creates this ability to buffer some of the value streams for the utility, because they're going to be tracking the kilowatt hours over time, and then they're going to be able to draw that down. So they actually have this banking ability through the kilowatt hours. Also, because we're subtracting those kilowatt hours from the bills, there's also a slight tax benefit for those households as well, because it's just going to be a subtraction of kilowatt hours. Okay, so in order to analyze this, I think one of the challenges generally in this space of thinking about low-income solar generally, but low-income solar that's linking with energy assistance specifically, one of the challenges is trying to, I think, strike the right balance between what pencils and for all the parties, what pencils for the utility, the cap, the homeowner, but also what's administratively feasible here. And so to look at this, we developed a kind of tabletop model to help track all of the different flows of energy and dollars and energy assistance to try to understand, okay, what would this look like for all the involved parties? And how do we start to get our heads around who's going to need to be tracking what over the course of the year to make this work? And so we built this model that does a couple of things. One is it's calculating solar output that fluctuates over time. And initially when we started this project, I don't think we thought that we were going to need, hourly temporal resolution to look at this. But as we dug into it and tried to understand more from the utility's perspective, what would make this pencil or not, we really realized that that demand charge is really important, and we had to understand how solar was going to interact with that. So we're really looking at now hourly solar production over several years of historic weather data to calculate that variable value. And so then we're able from there to calculate the avoided wholesale energy and demand costs and the overall, therefore, value to the utility. We then are looking at this EAP transfer from the cap back to the utility. And we're using a couple of historic bills, real world bills, to understand what those monetary values might be. And then we're tracking that kilowatt hour bank as it accumulates and then gets drawn down. Then for the customer impact, we have these sample bills from Mahube-Otwa's actual energy assistant recipients over the last couple of years. And so we're going to use their monthly consumption to try to actually simulate, what would it have looked like for those customers to have been on this program historically? What would their bill look like before and after this solar kilowatt hour credit was applied? So a lot of different data sources. We use the SAM model. We use a lot of confidential data from Detroit Lakes Public Utilities about their rates and how that works. We use some cost data from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and then the sample bills. We also used, very interestingly, the NREL end user load profiles to get simulated bills. And so we can look at different types of households, manufactured households, single family, multifamily households, households of different ages, households with electric heat, to get those simulated bills. So to recap, we're looking at all these different cash flows, the energy flows, and we're really trying to give a good sense of how this program could look in the real world, and also a little bit of the administrative challenges of trying to implement something like this. Okay, so some of the results now. So first on the energy bank, the way that this energy bank works is shown here in blue is what a individual subscriber's generation would look like. This is for a 4 kW subscription. And you can see here some of the, this is all simulated data, but what you can see here is we pull a different historic meteorological year from the Detroit Lakes area, and we simulate in the SAM model what solar production would look like actually in each hour over the course of the year. Here it's summed up by month, but you can see these different profiles, and then what happens is we create a sum total of the previous 12 months of solar production, starting going backwards from the beginning of heating season and counting the 12 months prior, to be able to say at the beginning of the heating season, this is how many kilowatt hours can be credited to the household over those heating months from October to April. And so what you can see here is that, in the first year of simulated production, there's nearly 1,000 kilowatt hours per month that can be credited. In year 2, it happened to be a lower solar production year, and so there's only about 850 kilowatt hours. In the third year, it's more like 950 kilowatt hours that can be credited per month in those heating months. But what's nice about this model, at least, is that even though solar production is going up and down each month and each year, at the beginning of heating season, it's knowable what the benefit's going to be in each month of that heating period. Then we work through all the different cash flows I described earlier to try to understand what's going to be the bill impact of this for the subscribers, and how does that compare to their bills otherwise. And with community solar, it's possible to get as much benefit as you want by oversizing these subscriptions. So to help calibrate a little bit, as I'll talk about at the end, we're thinking of this as a potential model for the Solar for All program. And in Solar for All, there's a goal of 20% bill reductions. And so we try to calibrate in these figures here what it would look like to have at least 20% bill savings. So we've calibrated the subscription sizes with that goal in mind. So on the left is one of the real world customers served by energy assistance in Mahube-Otwa. And you can see what we've done is we've just taken their monthly load profile, their actual monthly bills. For this household, they've been paying around $225 in the middle of winter for their electric bill. And then we applied the Solar EAP program. And in this program, they're getting a monthly kilowatt hour credit that's worth about $72 a month in the heating season for a 24% bill reduction. The household on the right has a higher energy bill. Their bills peaked at about $325 in the heating season. And so they have a slightly larger subscription size, 5 kW, which amounts to about a 22% annual bill reduction or $95 a month in the heating season. Overall, though, I think the key takeaway is, the way we have structured this and the way Detroit Lake's rates work out and the estimated solar production, our calculation is that this program could create about $15 to $20 per kilowatt per month in the heating season, structured this way. And so for a household that is spending $100 to $200 to $300 a month in the heating season, we can calibrate their subscription size to be able to hit that 20% or more bill reduction over the course of a year, which means, of course, a lot more benefits in those heating months. But that rough figure, $15 to $20 per kilowatt per month, is pretty constant across a lot of different scenarios and sensitivities that we looked at. As I mentioned, one of the key things we want to understand too is how does this compare to traditional energy assistance? And so what we want to do also is make sure that no household is worse off on this program than their ordinary energy system. In fact, would be made better off through this. And so again, this kind of comes down to trying to calibrate the subscription size so that they're getting at least as much and ideally a lot more benefit out of this than they would under their traditional energy assistance. And so here is just a demonstration in our model. We're able to see what a household's energy bill was before this program, what it is with standard energy assistance, and then what it is with this solar enhanced energy assistance. And so our model helps to calibrate that subscription size again so that you can see these reductions playing out. Really critical, we've thought a lot, this whole time, this is a pilot project, and what makes a pilot project a success? I think for a pilot project to be successful, we have to demonstrate that this is administratively feasible, but I think really important in this context that for the utilities that are participating, they're not being made worse off, that there isn't a kind of what some utilities would call cross-subsidization created by these programs, that if energy assistance customers are being made better off, that it's not at the expense of other customers, that it really is a way to create new value streams, not just shift value among customers. And so part of our analysis is also a check on that. We're looking at the impact on the utility, really the incremental impact on the utility. Here, what we're looking at is an estimate of what it would look like to scale up this project. I think as Steve mentioned, this project, the pilot was really grant funded, really to understand that administrative side of things. But here we're looking at the question of, well, what if we scaled this up? So here we're using project cost data from the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So on a per subscription basis, we're calculating first the cost of the solar project, and then we're calculating what's the avoided cost or the wholesale energy avoided cost to the utility. And we see that pencils. So in other words, what this shows is that based on our estimates, this solar project creates more value to the utility than it costs. And so, that's a good indication that this solar project has value there. And then we look at the transfers in to the utility from energy assistance, and then the solar EAP credits, which are larger than the EAP transfer in. And the fact that the EAP credits are larger than the EAP transfer in is a good sign too, because that means more value is going to those subscribers than they would be otherwise on traditional energy assistance. But then what this last bar shows is, all said and told, when you add everything together, the cost of the solar project, the benefit of avoided wholesale energy purchases, the benefit of receiving energy assistance, and then the cost of providing these kilowatt hour credits, there's still a net positive overall to the utility. So there's value now even to the non-subscribers. Then the figure on the right takes this one step further by saying, let's not look just at the utilities avoided cost rate, but actually look at what their simulated avoided purchases would be at the utilities avoided energy and demand charges. And as I mentioned earlier, we spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, but these demand charges fluctuate quite a bit from year to year. But when you take the average year, the total value of avoiding energy and demand is quite a bit larger than just the utilities avoided cost. And so when you take into account our simulations of what their realized avoided costs would be, not their formal avoided costs, there's even more value to the non-subscribers than was apparent, I think, in the more simplistic analysis shown on the left. So all that taken, wanted to wrap up here with a couple of open questions that we're thinking about on this project team that would love to get feedback from folks in the audience or just kind of invite further conversations, because as this pilot is in operation, right now currently it is generating the first year of kilowatt hour credits. I spoke to the Detroit Lakes General Manager, Vernell Roberts, just last week, and he's excited to see these kilowatt hours accumulating, and there's still questions that he has about what this is going to look like in implementation. And so I laid out here some of the questions that we're thinking about on this team for conversation. So I think first is, one of the things that we've learned by studying some of the real world bills is that actually providing an equal monthly benefit to energy assistance households might not actually always be the best for those households. In fact, when we were looking at this, we saw that there are some households that are served by Mahube-Otwa who have such sharp peaks, like their energy bills in the middle of winter are so much higher in the shoulder months that in order to guarantee 20% savings, they would need to have negative bills in those shoulder months when there isn't that much heating demand, but it's technically heating season. And so one of our questions is there a way we could design this without adding an incredible amount of new administrative complexity, where we could start to shape some of those kilowatt hour credits so that the kilowatt hour credit is greater in the middle of winter rather than those shoulder seasons. That feels like conceptually straightforward, but quite challenging to figure out how to implement that. And so we have some ideas for how this might work, but don't have quite the solutions yet. Another question we have is that we've learned a lot from our conversations with energy assistance providers that there's a real challenge in having to enroll households every year, year after year, and that sometimes households are coming into programs late into heating season and maybe not getting as much benefit as they could, or maybe funds have run out, and there's a real challenge there of having to do this continuous enrollment. Well, one of our questions is, could this solar subscription model prove stickier with households? Could this keep households in the program year after year without having to re-enroll them, or maybe at least have that touch point that is early in the heating season a little just bit more automatically? And so that's one of our questions too, is that as this program continues, could this help households stay in a benefit providing program year after year? When it comes to the utility side, we have a couple questions as well. And one is, with all of the changes brought by the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly for munis and co-ops, I think there's a lot of questions around the direct pay or elective pay option and how that's going to play out in the real world. We've heard some things over the course of this project from people more on the tax side that that direct pay credit could take 17 or 18 months after project completion to actually be received. And so there's a real carrying cost. And for municipal utilities, how they're going to raise debt, for cooperatives, how they're going to go out and borrow, that's a real challenge when you have to cover not just the construction loan period, but also this new development period where the project's already operating, but those tax credits haven't been received yet. And so that's a real kind of financing question mark that we have. Another question we have from the utility perspective is thinking about the best way strategies for building scale, particularly across multiple municipal utilities in the same power provider. Detroit Lakes Public Utility is a municipal utility served by the Missouri River Energy Service, which is a joint action agency providing power to a number of regionally co-located municipal utilities. We're trying to understand right now a little bit more about the opportunities for multiple munis served by Missouri River to partner on a larger community solar project, maybe getting some of that economies of scale. But there's definitely contractual complexities in thinking across multiple munis. As I've mentioned a couple times, through building this model and running this pilot project, one of the big things we're hoping to resolve is how to manage this complexity in billing, financial transfers, and banking. This is new for all the parties involved. Right now, I think a lot of this is going to get done manually, adjusting bills and such. But moving forward to scale this up, we're really interested in trying to understand opportunities to lower that administrative complexity, particularly if there's ways that could be, really tailored to fit for munis and maybe munis and co-ops to help simplify that administrative complexity. And then finally, last point here is, as I mentioned, we're working right now with the Department of Commerce on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund Solar for All program, which I think hopefully a lot of folks on the call are thinking about right now. CISA has been a great help to our team in Minnesota thinking about this application. We're really trying to think what the strategies are for muni and co-op engagement in this. And not just munis and co-ops, but thinking about the populations they serve, which tend to have more manufactured housing. We're thinking also about engaging the tribes, thinking about how to engage municipal governments and county governments and regional development organizations, how to really leverage all of these resources around the Solar for All program and where we go from here. We think that there's some really interesting learnings from this project about how to sort of design from the bottom up a community solar program that can benefit low-income households tailored to the municipal utility context. But we're looking for more models. Minnesota has 120 munis, 45 co-ops, and it's a really important part of our energy landscape here. And so if folks have ideas for what other models might work really well for munis and co-ops or for manufactured and multifamily housing, we are all ears right now as we are putting pen to paper on this application. And so with that, I'll wrap up our presentation, and I think Matt and Anna will facilitate some Q&A and would love to hear folks' thoughts or comments or questions about this project.
Great, thanks so much, Gabe, Dan, and Steve. We'll get into the Q&A session portion right now. We'll start off with a couple questions that may be most applicable to Dan related to the customer base. So just, Dan, wondering if what the process was for outreach and recruitment, if folks were automatically enrolled, was there an education component, was there a form or agreement signed, and just how that process played out.
Sure. Yeah. So what we did is we looked at our energy assistance lists of people that were currently in the program, and then we identified those who have been on the program for multiple years. So we'd have that stability, because that was part of the request from the utility side of things too, is we want to have a stable base of people or customers to draw from. Then at that point, then we identified who had the highest energy burden. We looked at who had all electric heating systems, so there wasn't natural gas or another redundant heating system, whether it was a backup fuel oil or something else like that. Then we also so we whittled it down from, I think, 78 all-electric homes are listed as all-electric. There are some that haven't received a delivered fuel or natural gas subsidy in the last several years, but in doing more research, we found out that they did have a redundant heat source. So we kind of pulled those people out. At that point, then we shortened that list down to people between 10,000 kWh a year and 30,000 kWh a year. And at that point, then we did outreach, telephone calls, sending out letters, and then getting them on board. So we did have a release of information so we could get access to their energy bills. So then at that point, I anonymized everything. So Steve and Gabe have no idea who this person is. And basically it's, I've got a list and I think I'm the only one who has access to know who number 1 on the list is versus who's number 6 on the list. So that's kind of a little bit of the process on how we selected people. It was, opt-in based upon the criteria that we identified.
Great. So just as simple as reaching out to them and having them opt in, and nothing more complex than that?
It's surprisingly difficult to get a hold of people. It's also generally you call up and say, hey, you want to be part of a pilot group, Community Solar. There's a little bit of stigma around solar at some points. We live in a fairly conservative part of the state and part of the country. So there's a little bit of resistance there. And then there's also a little bit of resistance to, this sounds too good to be true. So it's a little bit of sales as well.
Great, thank you. Question here, could Gabe explain again how the size of the quote banked credit is determined?
Yeah, so I think if I understand the question correctly, what we're trying to do is size the kilowatt hour subscription size so that in our model we could have at least 20% bill savings. And then the kilowatt hour bank is just whatever is produced by that kilowatts. I mean, technically, we only have production on the entire array, and so we're just taking a proportional slice. So, it was working backwards from what would it take in terms of subscription size to get at least that 20% savings, and then the kilowatt hours just grow as a proportion of that capacity of their subscription to the total array size.
Great, thank you. Lots of questions coming in. So the pilot, this model is focused for munis and co-ops. Do you see this model working for IOUs in addition to munis and co-ops?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I know that a lot of folks across the country have done a lot of thinking, concluding at many CESA webinars about the intersections of energy assistance and community solar. There are challenges and opportunities with all of these models. I think in the IOU context, maybe things are a little bit different where that, particularly, as I mentioned, we spend a lot of time trying to think about what's the value proposition for the municipal utility. And then, we can present that to the general manager of the utility, and then, he can say go, no go, and, yes, I want to do this project. He can take it to get approvals, but it's a pretty kind of self-contained process, whereas, in an IOU process, this would be much more extensive and heavily regulated, and, there might be opportunities for other revenue streams. And so it's a little bit different. So I would say, like, in concept, maybe. In practice, I think what worked really nicely for this project was being able to have hours of time, like a monthly check-in with the general manager of the utility, who had a lot of authority to act in his customers and his community's best interest, and could do that in a pretty straightforward way. And I think that'd be a lot more complicated in IOU context.
Great, thank you. Next question, considering the importance of wholesale demand charges for utilities, I'm wondering how it pencils out to add batteries to solar in this model. Has that been analyzed?
Yeah, I'll say we didn't analyze it in this project, but one of Detroit Lake's neighboring municipal utilities served by the same power provider has looked quite extensively at that. and has an operating solar and storage project. I would say using batteries to avoid demand charges is a politically big issue. And there's a lot of complexity in being able to do that, and whether or not contractually that is encouraged or disallowed. And I think across the country in munis and co-ops that have demand charges, whether or not a battery can be used to avoid or augment that demand charge, utilities are all over the map on that question.
Thank you. This question, I think, kind of gets at the scaling up this model to cover more energy assistance customers. So, sorry, I just lost it. Might there be a way to distribute the financial benefits of solar more equitably to the entire CAP client base? Not that this model isn't equitable, but how do you see if this model were to be scaled up for a particular utility or CAP client base, for instance, what that looks like in an equitable way? Would there be different allocations for credits based on energy usage, so on and so forth?
Yeah, Dan, do you want to try that one?
Sure, I can give that a try. I think, yeah, in a utopian world, if we could get a large enough bank where we could just say, if you're a member of this utility, you get a piece of it. One thing that we were really trying to do is, well, we started this project back, I think, 14 or 16 months ago, was how do we make that a meaningful impact? Because there's a component of conservation, and how do you get people to change their ways? You know, $1 a month on your bill when your bill is $300 doesn't really make a big impact. But yeah, if we can scale this up to a point where we can get meaningful dollars that are shown on their bill, and you know, could even match this up with some sort of tracking system where you could look and see that, hey, I've used 22% of my solar credit for the month. I'm going to keep the lights off or turn the thermostat down. I think that would be a definite component to this. That was one of the utopian things we were looking at the beginning of this project. We've kind of evolved into, let's really identify what's a meaningful impact for a select few at the start. But going forward, I think, yeah, if we could get the ability to have everybody have a little bit of slice, I think that'd be great.
Great. Anything to add, Gabe or Steve? That question?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the Solar for All application, we are, you know, trying to tee up maybe some of the insights that Dan was talking about. You know, if we do have the ability to scale up these kinds of projects, what are those, you know, real kind of cost-effective, most widely deployable kind of models to have those benefits hit as many households as possible? You know, a lot of this was conceptualized before, you know, even the IRA was passed when we got started on this. And so it seemed like, okay, how do we make this pencil for everyone without a lot of external dollars? Now that, you know, where everyone in the country is dreaming really big about how to scale these things up, we have been having a couple of conversations in our planning process for that about, okay, how do we meaningfully engage some of the energy assistance providers in thinking about these, you know, bigger scale models that can benefit more households all at once.
Great. And there's a question about efficiency for the manufactured homes residents who are participants. Is there, and apologies if this was already mentioned earlier in the presentation, is there an efficiency requirement? Has weatherization been done to all of the participants, or yeah, how do those things coincide?
Yeah, I can speak to that part. I don't think that everyone has had full weatherization done to their homes. There was a pilot program that we did a few years back with the CERTS group, the Clean Energy Resource Team, where we did go right down the list of a couple of manufactured homes within the city of Detroit Lakes public utility territory, where we did go in and we changed out all their existing light bulbs to make sure that they had LEDs in there. We added pipe wrap, we did weather stripping, we did some of that real initial kind of easy low-hanging fruit type of weatherization, and we did that whether they had received weatherization in the past or were still on the list or weren't even on the radar for weatherization. So they have had at least some sort of weatherization at this point, but it's just a matter of whether it's a full-blown DOE weatherization where it's adding insulation and doing all the stuff or not.
Great, thanks. Looks like we have a few minutes left. We'll end it on one more question. Question is, what happens at the end of the solar panel lifespan? Who pays for the recycling? What happens to the customers? Has that been thought through?
I think quite honestly, we haven't gotten there yet. You know, I think that's a great question to be thinking about now. I know some developers will build that into their agreement. I don't know if the Detroit Lakes folks have thought about that yet, but no, I don't think we've gotten there quite yet. Just trying to get it off the ground.
Yeah, and I will add, I've got a background in development at community scale solar, and about decommissioning and end of life and recycling. What I have seen is that the authorities with jurisdiction and permitting is where that is handled. So there are secondary markets that are developing, but a project may include it, but it's usually included when the local authorities doing permitting ask for it. So that's a great thing to add into, you know, how do we look at these long-term contracts, especially as they get to, you know, 1 megawatt and larger for the decommissioning portion. It's also an incredibly difficult thing to know 25 years from now what the value of something is, but it is best to contemplate it at the start.
And in general, with the subscription to the normal community solar garden here in Detroit Lakes is it was a 20-year purchase program, so you pay for your panel up front, and it's a 20-year purchase cycle, and it's either it follows you around, or you can reassign it, or it goes back to the utility if you move out of the territory. But at the end of 20 years, it's no longer your panel.
Great. Well, thanks so much to the three of you. Is there anything that hasn't been covered or addressed that you'd like to mention at the end?
No, just yeah, thank you to CISA and the Clean Energy Resource teams and Detroit Lakes Public Utilities for all the work on this.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, I'll hand it back over to my colleague Anna, who will close us out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. And thank you to our presenters and especially to everyone who joined today's webinar and listened to this super interesting topic. I hope you all learned at least part of as much as I did. I really enjoyed it. As you can see on the slide here, here are our upcoming webinars on our calendar. The next one up is Energize Your Impact. How funders and donors can support equitable solar power. That one's on September 6th, and it's a follow-up to a report that we published a while ago. You can find that report on the webinar page. After that, Matt is moderating another webinar, and this one's on a New York funding program, pre-development funding program for LMI solar and storage. Like I said earlier, you all can see our webinar info and RSVP for any upcoming webinars that interest you on our website, cisa.org/webinars. And that is also where the recording for today's webinar will be posted. Again, thank you all so much for joining today's webinar, and I hope to see you at future ones. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.